Ahead through the fog, a massive black shape, larger than the puma-shaped rock outcrop, loomed imposingly, an island not on any of her map's asterisk. "No way," Isabel whispered, her trembling hand flipping through the paper nautical charts, then looking back at the now useless GPS screen. "There's nothing here. Just water, hundreds of meters of deep water." Her reason was screaming, trying to find an explanation. An optical illusion caused by fog and weak light? A volcanic island that had just emerged? But she knew, deep down, the answer wasn't in her books. "That's their island," Juan said, his voice low and full of awe. "The island of the departed, where their pain is strong enough to create land." Isabel didn't respond. She no longer had the strength to argue with his logic. Their boat, seemingly pulled by an invisible current, was slowly drifting toward the ghostly island. The fog around them seemed to be hurting them, giving them no choice but to move forward as they approached. The island became clearer, and it was more terrifying than imagined. It had no lush greenery, only black volcanic rocks, sharp like shards of a dead star. A few skinny, bare trees reached toward the sky, their branches twisted together like the fingers of a drowning person. No bird sounds, no life. Just the silence of a grave. The beach wasn't white sand, but a layer of fine black gravel, glistening in a sickly way. And at the center of the island, through the bare trees, Isabel could see a faint red light flickering, a lingering heartbeat in the darkness. Their boat gently drifted ashore. Juan was the first to step down. He bowed his head, muttering something in Aymara. Isabel, after a moment of hesitation, followed, her feet sinking slightly into the cold black gravel. They saw a trail. It wasn't a natural path, but paved with black stone slabs, smooth and shiny, all identical in size and shape. It led deep into the island, straight toward the red light. "We have to go," Isabel said. Though every cell in her body was screaming in protest, she needed answers. The scientist's curiosity, now turned into an obsession, was stronger than fear. They walked on the stone path, and immediately, the whispers returned. This time, clearer, closer, as if emanating from the trees around them. Juan stopped, listening. "The jailer's home," he translated, his voice full of horror. "It's saying this is the home of the one who imprisoned them." The path led them to a clearing at the center of the island. In the middle of the clearing was a single black stone pedestal. And on the pedestal, a small object lay, seemingly absorbing all the weak light around it. It was a dagger. It was made from obsidian, black and shiny, with a razor-sharp edge. The hilt was inlaid with silver, featuring a snake biting its own tail. A cold aura, full of hatred, emanated from it. The red light they had seen was the eerie reflection from this blade. There it was. "His anchor, unbelievable," Isabel whispered, slowly approaching the pedestal, almost unconsciously pulling out her camera. She had to capture this. "No miss," Juan shouted. "It's a trap." But it was too late. As Isabel raised the camera, the whispers around them suddenly fell silent instead. It turned into laughter. A dry, mocking laugh that echoed across the island. Isabel spun around, her heart dropping into an abyss. The black stone pathway they had just walked on was gone. In its place was a dense wall of tangled trees and thick fog, impenetrable. Juan had seen it, his hand clutching the black stone around his neck, his eyes quickly scanning the surroundings, searching for a non-existent escape. They were trapped. "Welcome, curious ones," a voice rang out, not from any specific direction, but seemingly from everywhere at once, from the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. The voice was ancient, full of power, and steeped in centuries-old hatred. It was the voice of the priest. A dark shadow slowly took form in the midst of the clearing, not a physical body, but a gathering of fog and darkness, forming a tall, hazy, human figure with two bright red points in place of eyes. "Your knowledge is useless here, outsider," the ghost said, the two red points focusing on Isabel. "Your numbers and maps cannot measure pain. They cannot redraw the boundaries of eternity." Isabel felt the camera in her hand suddenly become heavy. She looked down and was horrified to see that its alloy shell was starting to rust and decay at an unnatural speed, disintegrating like ash. She quickly threw it away. Her scientific reason, its symbol, had just been destroyed before her eyes. The ghost turned to Juan. "And your prayers are empty, old man. Your gods abandoned this place long ago. Only I and the agony remain." Juan didn't respond with words. He closed his eyes, beginning to murmur an ancient Amara hymn, his voice steady and fearless. It wasn't a plea, but an affirmation of faith, a spiritual shield. "Don't be afraid, miss," he said softly to Isabel, eyes still closed. "It feeds on fear. The more fear, the stronger it becomes." Isabel tried to follow. She took deep breaths, trying to analyze the situation like a scientist. She observed the shaman's, the priest's dagger on the altar. The red light from it seemed to be fluctuating. She glanced at her own heartbeat on her smartwatch, and she saw it every time a wave of fear rose in her. Her heart rate spiked, and the light from the dagger flared up, stronger. The priest's shadow figure became more defined. "As well, Juan, you're right," she whispered. "It's connected to our emotions." That was a small discovery, a morsel of logic in an irrational world, but it was enough to give Isabel a foothold. She couldn't fight it with force, but she could understand it. She focused on Juan's hymn, using it as an anchor for her mind. She ignored the priest's mocking words, ignored the hallucinations of skeletal snakes crawling out from under the black gravel layer. She focused only on the dagger, analyzing it from afar. She noticed one thing. On the silver hilt, there was a very small crack, almost invisible, that was its weakness. The anchor was not perfect. Realizing that his mocking words were no longer effective, the priest's soul roared in anger. The laughter stopped, replaced by the crackling sound of rotting wood. Isabel and Juan watched in horror as the trees around the clearing began to move, their roots emerging from the ground like spider legs, and the trunks twisting, turning into tall, gnarled gatekeeper figures, slowly advancing toward them. The rustling of the tree roots on the black gravel sounded more gruesome than any footsteps. Their bark cracked open, revealing eyes made from red tree sap, soulless and full of malice. They had no mouths, but Isabel could hear low growling sounds emanating from their rotten wooden cores. "Run!" Isabel shouted, pulling Juan's hand. They didn't run toward the undefined fog wall, but by instinct, toward the only solid structure in the clearing, the black stone altar. They huddled behind it, the cold stone pressing against their backs, while the circle of wooden guardians slowly tightened. "They are earthwood," Juan whispered, his breath ragged but his voice maintaining an unnatural calm. "His soul comes from water. His power on land is limited. He can only control what is dead or already rotting." Isabel looked at the approaching figures, their movements slow and ponderous. Juan was right. They were strong but not agile. But There were too many, and they had no escape. Her eyes fixed on the obsidian dagger on the altar. The red seemed light from it, like was the center of all power on this island. She noticed something strange. The wooden figures, while advancing, seemed to slightly hesitate when getting too close to the red light emanating from the dagger. They appeared both controlled by it and fearful of it. "Juan," she said quickly, a mad and desperate plan flashing in her mind. "That dagger. It's his source of power, but maybe it's also the weakness. Its light slows them down. Touching it is suicide, miss," Juan warned. "It contains all his hatred." "Dying here is also suicide," Isabel replied, looking at the shadows of the figures already falling over them. "We need a weapon, or at least a shield. If she had to die," she thought, "she'd touch its heart." She looked at Juan, their eyes meeting, and in that moment, he saw the determination in her eyes. He nodded. Slowly, "I'll give you time." And then, Juan did something Isabel never expected. He stepped out from behind the altar, standing tall facing the approaching figures. He began to sing loudly, an ancient Aymara song, heroic and challenging. It wasn't a prayer, but a battle chant. The wooden guardians halted, their sap eyes all turning toward him at once, as if confused by the sound. That was Isabel's chance. She dashed out from hiding, running around to the other side of the altar. The ground shook under each heavy step of the figures. A branch-like arm whipped across, grazing her shoulder, tearing her jacket. But she didn't stop. She reached the altar. The dagger lay there, still cold and inviting. The air around it was thick and icy. She reached out, hesitation and fear suppressed by desperation as her fingers touched the ice-cold surface of the dagger. A surge of dark, freezing energy rushed up her arm, and in her head, hundreds of voices screamed at once, not of the warriors, but of the betrayer himself. They were fragments of his memories, a storm of hatred, greed, and fanaticism. Isabel saw flashing images, sharp as razors, stabbing into her mind. Inca gold offerings piled high as mountains, campfire light dancing on the trusting faces of warriors, and then the priest himself, eyes blazing with sick ambition as he recited lines from a book bound in human skin. She saw him secretly adding poison to the communal wine jug. She saw the soldiers collapse, coughing blood, and the horror in their eyes as they realized the betrayal. She saw him standing on the cliff, arms raised high, performing the final ritual as the ships burned, imprisoning their souls in the eternal lake. That spiritual storm nearly tore her consciousness apart. But amid the chaos of those malevolent memories, Isabel's analytical brain found a pattern. His power was not infinite. It was controlled, channeled from this dagger to his creations. The dagger wasn't just a battery. It was a remote control. And now she was holding it. "You can control them." A part of her reason screamed, "But you're not him." She wouldn't try to control them. She would do what an engineer would do with a compromised system. She would sever the connection while Juan was still belting out the battle chant to attract the figure's attention. Isabel closed her eyes, ignoring the splitting headache. She focused all her will on the dagger, on the invisible link between it and the wooden guardians. She didn't think in words, but with a pure command, a mental directive etched into her mind. Terminate connection *. Immediately, a strange silence enveloped everything. The wooden figures which had been slowly advancing toward Juan, all froze at once. The red light in their eyes made of tree resin flickered, then faded away. The creaking of rotting wood ceased. They stood motionless for a second, then slowly began to disintegrate. The bark cracked, the wooden bodies rotted and collapsed, reverting to lifeless piles of branches and roots on the black gravel ground. They had won, but victory came at a price. Isabel felt all the energy in her body drained away. She staggered, her knees buckling. Blood began to flow from her nose. Juan rushed over to support her. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and admiration. But the priest's spirit was not one to give up so easily. Having lost his soldiers, he shifted to another plan. He would destroy his own prison to bury them along with his secrets. Entire island began to shake violently. The ground beneath their feet cracked open. The black rock started to shatter and fall into the churning water around them. The roaring was no longer from the spirits, but from the island itself self-destructing. The stone altar began to sink. "The island is sinking," Juan shouted, pulling Isabel to her feet. "We have to get to the boat." They dashed out of the clearing, running toward the black gravel beach where their research boat was being pulled away from the shore by ghostly waves created by the tremors. The black stone path they had taken in was cracking and sinking behind them. Each step was a race against death, as the ground under their feet could collapse at any moment. The obsidian dagger remained tightly gripped in Isabel's hand. Cold and unnaturally heavy, the roar of rocks behind them grew louder. The earth shook fiercely, cracks snaking across the black gravel like serpents trying to swallow them. "Faster!" Juan yelled, his voice hoarse from the wind and dust. He was no longer the calm old man. Now he was a man fighting for his life. They raced toward the beach, but every step was a challenge. A large boulder fell from above, slamming down right in front of them, sending black gravel flying everywhere. Isabel tripped, but Juan quickly pulled her up. Finally, they reached the water's edge. But a new despair hit them. Their research boat, which had been anchored just a few dozen meters from shore, was now being pulled farther out, drifting lazily, pushed by unnatural black waves toward the middle of the lake. Their escape was slowly abandoning them. "No!" Isabel cried, watching the boat drift away. "We can't swim to it. The current is too strong." They were trapped. Behind them was a dying island. In front was a watery grave, cold and unforgiving. Juan stood panting, staring at the boat with a defeated expression. For the first time since the haunting began, Isabel saw helplessness in his eyes. But in that moment of despair, Isabel felt the dagger in her hand. It was cold. An unnatural cold, the chill of the abyss. And it vibrated lightly, not from the island's collapse, but in resonance with the surrounding water. It came from the water. Its power was water. An idea flashed in her mind, not a logical thought, but a truth revealed by instinct. The priest had used it to control spirits, create illusions, and imprison them. This dagger was his bridge to the lake, and now she held that bridge. There was no time to think. Acting on an inexplicable urge, Isabel stepped to the water's edge. She raised the dagger in front of her, its black, shiny blade pointing toward the boat. She closed her eyes. She ignored the island's roar, the crashing waves. She focused on the cold in her hand, on the connection between it and the water. She recited no incantations, performed no rituals. She simply commanded. With all her remaining will, she focused on a single order. Be still for a second. Nothing happened. Then, a miracle occurred. The ghostly waves pushing the boat away suddenly vanished. The water between her and the boat, which had been swirling violently, began to calm. The chaos seemed to retreat, creating a narrow path, still as glass, connecting the crumbling shore to their boat. "Dear God," Juan whispered, unable to believe his eyes, but the miracle came at a cost. Isabel felt a sharp pain in her head, and another. Trickle of blood flowed from her nose. She staggered, nearly collapsing. "Now!" Juan shouted, recognizing their fragile opportunity. He supported Isabel, and together, they plunged into the strangely calm water. The water was freezing, but they didn't care. They swam and waited desperately, and in just a minute, they reached the boat's side. With their last strength, they climbed. Aboard, Juan rushed to the cockpit, starting the engine. The boat roared to life and began moving. Leaving the haunted island behind, they looked back. The black island, in its final convulsions, had collapsed. The whole thing sank beneath Lake Titicaca in a tremendous roar and a massive column of steam. Leaving no trace, as if it had never existed, silence returned. The haunting was truly over. Isabel slumped onto the deck, gasping for breath, her body exhausted. She had done it. They had survived. She slowly opened her clenched hand. Looking at the object that had saved them, the obsidian dagger was still there. But something had changed. The evil red glow inside it had vanished. Instead, from deep within the obsidian stone, a white light, faint like mist, began to pulse gently, a weak but steady beat, perfectly synchronized with her own heartbeat. Isabel sat motionless on the deck, her eyes fixed on the object in her palm. The terror of the escape had subsided, giving way to a stunned amazement. The dagger, the anchor of a betrayer's soul, the source of the wrath that had imprisoned hundreds of spirits, was now beating in unison with her. The icy chill of the abyss was gone, replaced by a cool, neutral sensation, like a stone smoothed by a stream. The sky had brightened. The ghostly fog had lifted, and Lake Titicaca returned to its primal serene beauty. If not for the battered research boat, the shattered equipment, and the two exhausted people, no one would believe the nightmare that had unfolded just hours before. The ghost island had vanished without a trace. Juan steered the boat, his eyes fixed on the familiar harbor in the distance, but occasionally, he glanced at Isabel and the dagger in her hand with a complex expression, a mix of relief and deep anxiety. After a long while, he spoke, his voice hoarse from fatigue. "It's over. His spirit has dissipated. The warriors can rest in peace." "How do you know?" Isabel asked, her eyes not leaving the flickering white light. "I can feel it," Juan replied simply. "The lake is breathing again. The heaviness is gone." He looked at the dagger. "But that thing, it doesn't belong to this world, miss. The hatred is gone, but its power remains. Return it to the lake. That's where it belongs." Isabel looked up at him. Logically, Juan was absolutely right. Throw it into the deepest part of the lake, and everything would truly end. But a part of her, the unyielding scientist, protested. What had happened? Why had it changed? Why was it connected to her? Throwing it away meant discarding the only answers to those questions. Moreover, another fear crept into her mind. "But what if we throw it away?" she said slowly. "What if someone else finds it? What if it awakens something else?" She had become the unwilling guardian of a supernatural object. It was a responsibility she had never asked for, but now, after everything that had happened, she felt she couldn't refuse it. Juan looked at her, understanding the conflict in her eyes. He said nothing more, just sighed and turned back to steering the boat. When they docked, Isabel carefully wrapped the dagger in a clean cloth and placed it deep in her secure backpack. The pulsing sensation was still there, a silent and frightening companion. They were silent throughout the trip back to the small village. Upon arrival, Juan looked at Isabel one last time. You've done a great thing, miss, but be careful. There are things we can never fully understand." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure shrinking and blending into the morning sunlight. Isabel stood there alone, feeling a profound solitude. She looked toward the lake where the red waters had once existed. The surface was flat and peaceful, but as she gazed, the dagger in her backpack suddenly pulsed once, stronger than usual, and in her mind, a whisper echoed. It wasn't the priest's scream, not the warrior's lament. It was an entirely different voice, clear, gentle, and carrying a distant sadness of a woman. A voice she felt she had heard before in the blurred photo in the cave. It said only one word: "Thank you."
In the shadow of my archive, a new horror stirs. Date to listen.